most of you know me. My name is Nancy Lucino, and I'm the manager of BNL's Employee Assistance Program. Jude Trader-Wolf, who is here with us, has been doing the bulk of the talks on emotional intelligence, and she's going to come in and tie diversity. She's going to bring that together with the concept of emotional intelligence, but I'm going to be handling the first part. So please remember to stay until 1:30. Hopefully you all cleared it with your supervisor so they know that you're not coming back late from lunch. You actually were taking an important training. So, any questions before we begin? I'm just going to keep repeating for the people who just came in. Make sure you sign in, and please help yourself to those posters over there, because that's why I have them, so that you all take them back. Okay. So, our objectives here today. We're going to define diversity. I'm going to give you a little history about the laws to protect the diverse populations, the affirmative action laws, the equal employment opportunity laws, as well as the laws pertaining to protected disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're going to review some of the policies at Brookhaven Lab and where to find them, talking about stereotyping, biases, and assumptions. We're going to talk about ethnocentrism, describe how to become an agent for change, and we're going to look at valuing diversity at work and becoming more culturally and emotionally intelligent. Okay, so some people might say, well, what are you, Nancy, doing up here talking about diversity? Well, actually, I grew up in the most ethnically diverse community in New York City, which is the community of Queens. And in Queens, I believe, according to one of my statistics, there are at least 100 different languages and dialects being spoken in Queens. So I feel that I've been very privileged to grow up in this community because it exposed me to all different, one of my favorite things, all different kinds of foods and languages and cultures, ways of looking at things. And that's why I was really excited to do this talk today. Okay. So diversity means recognizing that there are differences between people, appreciating those differences, and having the appropriate response. So, for example, I grew up, one of my parents was Polish. My other parent was Irish. So I tended to identify more with the Polish side of my family because my grandmother was very influential in showing us the different foods and the different customs, and she gave us history about where they had come from in Poland. So I felt very comfortable with being able to say I'm Polish, but yet, yes, I am an American. So we're going to define diversity. The demographic characteristics of employees. Here at the lab, we have a workforce that's a mix of many different variables. We have the older generation, individuals who have been at the lab for many, many years. We have all the newcomers who are adding a fresh perspective and who have newer ways of doing things. We're actually a little bit heavier split towards male employees than female employees, but that's changing. We have Black, white, Latino, multinationals. We have individuals here from all over the globe. And I think that because of that special characteristic here at the lab, it places the responsibility on us to welcome new peoples and as well as have an acceptance of all of the different diverse populations that are working here. There's also diversity in terms of psychological characteristics. Some of you in the original flyer that I sent around, it was supposed to look like an iceberg. It looked a little bit more like a mountain, but it was supposed to look like an iceberg. Above the water are the more obvious things, or what I refer to as the public self. And those things might be a person's gender, their physical characteristics, the color of their skin. But below the water, below the surface, on that original flyer, were things that we might perceive of as the private self. And under the private self, there might be such diverse things as somebody's background, where they came from, their income level, their educational background, their sexual orientation that they may choose to keep private. People with disabilities might choose to keep private the nature of their disability. So because of this difference between the side of ourselves that people can obviously see, there are also diverse experiences that people have had that they bring to the table when they're at work. Some people who have come from a different country may have fled poverty, political oppression, religious oppression. We may not know that if we're just kind of talking off the top of our heads and unconsciously offending people. So what this means is that we have to become more conscious that there are many, many different peoples here from many, many different walks of life and different situations. So in this PowerPoint, I mentioned the educational experiences, people's income level, their religion. People who don't have kids sometimes are very sensitive if they're in a group of people where people are talking about their children and what they're doing on the weekend or how their children really bother them, etc. So we need to be sensitive to that. Different appearances, the geographic background, I talked about that, their marital status, their sexual identity, as well as their racial identity. So a diverse workforce in our global economy is now a reality. It's not a goal or a vision. We live in a very global culture, and especially here at the lab, we're living in a very global organization. Oh, go backwards. So the public self versus the private self. I was just talking about that. So the inner circle there is the public self. Maybe a person's age might be a little obvious to some people, their gender. All right, I got that backwards. Yes. Their physical qualities, their race, their ethnicity. And then in the outer circle, we have the parental status, somebody's military experience, their religious beliefs, marital status, work background, etc. Okay, so protecting diverse populations. So affirmative action in the United States began as a tool begun by President Kennedy. And those of you who are kind of around the same age as I am will remember the race riots of the 1960s. And President Kennedy said that he was going to create an affirmative action plan to ensure that applicants are employed without regard to race, creed, color, or national origin. This was signed in 1961. Well, unfortunately, President Kennedy was assassinated. President Lyndon Johnson took over for him, and he signed in 1964 the Civil Rights Act, which prohibited federal contractors as well as subcontractors from discriminating against employees or any applicants because of race, skin color, religion, gender, or national origin. The next act that came along that was very empowering was the creation of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which gave power to determine affirmative action employment opportunity programs. So that was in 1973. That was around the time feminism was coming into existence, And many women were involved in demonstrations that was looking for equal pay for equal work and equal employment opportunity. It kind of took a little bit of time to kind of get them up to speed, but they are a very powerful organization within government now, and it was followed then by the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. And if you're looking to find out what disabilities are protected under the 1990 ADA Act, you can go to that link, which later on when you get the PowerPoint, you will see that there are many protected disabilities. Okay? Okay, so the policies at Brookhaven Lab, all of these policies that are on this list can all be found on the website for Human Resources. There is a box on the upper right-hand side of the page where you can find the Respectful Workplace Policy, but then if you take back one of our posters, you will have a large version of it right there with you. So there's a Respectful Workplace Policy, there's the policy about the lab's value system, the different employee support systems that are available here at the lab, the workplace lactation policy, which protects women who are breastfeeding their children. There are now several different lactation rooms, one of which is in Building 490, right down the hall from my office, which, if you're a new mother, it is a beautiful little lactation room, and I encourage people to use it. And then the anti-retaliation policy, which is also found in that box, which protects people who feel that they have been discriminated against for reporting some kind of wrongdoing in the workplace. So if you're looking for any of those policies, look on Human Resources, and it'll bring you right there. You can download them. It's available for everybody to review. Okay, so here's one of our graphics here. Prejudice is a burden which confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible. Well, in my early years, I can tell you, I was very fortunate. I consider myself a person of privilege because I really didn't encounter all that much prejudice. I came from a nice, normal, middle-class family, of course, white. My parents worked. We lived in a house, not a very fancy house, I will tell you. But nevertheless, because of my grandparents coming to this country when they did, that provided certain standard of living for my family. So I consider myself a person of privilege. So consequently, I didn't really experience any prejudice. When I went to college, maybe the only prejudice I had was my parents didn't believe that girls should be educated because girls were just going to get married and have babies anyway. So I had to kind of fight to go to college, which that may seem absolutely ludicrous here in these times, but in those times, that was the way it was. So because my parents had not saved money for me to go to college, the City University of New York at that time was free. The only thing that I had to pay for my education were the cost of books as well as what they called a consolidated fee. The consolidated fee, I think, was maybe $65 per semester. And that's how I got through undergraduate school. I worked. I had my own apartment. But nobody sat around saying, gee, how are we going to make Nancy happy today? Write a check for something. It wasn't like that. So that was my main hardship in life. So I wanted to throw out that concept, a person of privilege. What do you think about that? Do you consider yourself privileged? Any takers? I also consider myself privileged. I grew up speaking English because English is a really, really hard language to learn if it's not your native language. What other people of privilege do we have here? No takers. Everybody's so quiet. Yes. Right, because we grew up in this country. We didn't have to face, there are people in this country that are very poor, but just by virtue of lotto, so to speak, we grew up in this country and we were born into certain freedoms that many other people have not experienced. So I believe that if we are a person of privilege, it is our responsibility to lend a hand to people who have not had that experience and who have come here and who are looking to either better themselves or, educate themselves or something like that. Okay? So we all came from someplace, whether our ancestors came from Europe, or they came from, let's see, where were some of the early people from? Ireland, England, Italy, where else? Germany? What? I can't hear you. Spain? Okay, that was the first rush of immigrants. And actually, I have an interesting statistic. Hold on. I forgot to bring this. Okay, so for those of you who are fascinated by stuff like this, you're going to be getting some of this stuff with your handouts. So I went on to the website for the Department of Homeland Security, and I was able to get some statistics for, it's called Legal Permanent Resident Status by Region and Selected Country of Last Residence, and it goes from 1820 to year 2011. And in 1820, do you know how many people migrated to the United States? 128,502. Okay? And then they break down those numbers by country of origin. So Europe sent 99,618, and then they break that down into different countries. And let's see. So I'm going to compare and contrast Europe, say, with Asia. And, okay. Asia, in 1820, sent 34 people to the United States in 1820. Okay, so then we move forward to the 10-year period between 1900 to 1909. And during that period, 8,202,388 people came to the U.S. And of that number, roughly 7.5 million came from Europe. And Asia, there were 300,000. Okay? Now we're going to fast forward the video. Hold on. Central America, by the way, or all the Americas, in 1880 to 1889, they sent 500,000, okay? So now we look from 1910 to 1999. So these were, the early 1900s were the greatest period of migration into the United States. So in 1910, we had almost 5 million people from Europe, and Asia sent 269,000. So between 1960 and 1999, the numbers for Asia kept going up. In 1960, Asia sent 358,000. The next decade, from 1970 to 1979, sent 1.4 million. The following decade, it jumped to almost 2.4 million. And then in 1990 to 1999, it was almost 3 million. And we'll look at the Americas again. The Americas, the early part of the century, 1910, they sent 1 million. 1920, they sent almost 1.6 million. And then it keeps going up and up and up, so that by 1970 to 79, it was 1.9 million, followed by 2.7 million, followed by the following decade, 5.1 million. Now, why is this so fascinating? I mean, am I the only one that finds this fascinating? I loved doing this. I'm a real nut for this. Well, it shows you that a lot of people want to be in this country. We got a pretty good deal going here, okay? And as it becomes more crowded, those of us who were around longer, I mean, I wasn't around in 1820, I can assure you that, but the people, the majority of people who have to accept more and more people, they have to be willing to, like, share the wealth, share the goodies, share the space, share the jobs, etc. The early founders to this country made a lot of money. They made the railroads, they created the banks, they really had a hand in shaping America. Those people who were here at the beginning of the pyramid, so to speak, they profited immensely from in effect, like the Wild Wild West of the United States. So as we look at some of the current figures, we see that the demographics are changing. There's less people from Europe, and now there's the new Americans. So in the 10-year period from 2000 to 2009, Asia sent 3,470 million people. India sent 590,000. The Americas, and when they do that, they group South America, Central America, 4.4 million. Mexico sent 1.7 million. And then the last year that they had statistics, 2011, there was only a total of 1 million people coming in. So they've kind of shut some of the gates to new immigrants. And certainly what happened after 9/11, that has had an impact on things. But the new immigrants are not necessarily this big influx that came from Europe. Now you see the biggest numbers come from Asia, India, and all of the Americas. So what does that mean for us here? Well, where did they go? So I got that statistic too. So here we are on Long Island, and most people want to come to good old New York. So if you live on Long Island, in the eyes of Homeland Security and the people that keep these statistics, they group our area, New York, Northern New Jersey, Long Island, and Pennsylvania. We're all in one lump. And of the million people that came in 2011, 183,000 in 1 year came here to New York, Long Island, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The next place that people go to are, and they're not nearly as many as the people that want to come here to New York, 86,000 went to Southern California. That would be obvious. And then the third place that people go to, Miami, Fort Lauderdale. All right? So that's something to be said. I mean, they've called New York the big melting pot. Well, the melting pot, to me, presumes that what you mean is that we all like melt down, and by assimilation, we become Americans. Well, not everybody wants to become assimilated. People want to retain their sense of who they are and what their culture is. So that's where there can be, some sources of conflict. And, I believe it's incumbent on us to kind of understand all these different cultures. And again, I'll repeat, I came from Queens, where there's everything. You walked out, my office was in Forest Hills for 25 years. Certainly we have the old Jewish population. We have individuals from Russia. We have individuals from many of the Asian countries, Iran, Iraq, India. We have everything. And all you have to do is walk down the street, and it is a mix of many different faces and languages, as well as restaurants. Okay, so no one leaves his or her world without having been transfixed by its roots, or with a vacuum for a soul. We all have something that we take from our world. We carry with us the memory of many, many fabrics, a self that is soaked in our history and culture, and a memory that is sometimes sharp and clear of the streets of our childhood. So we all bring these things with us, and we all refer back to these places in our memories. So I gave you the immigration statistics. So people can come to the U.S. simply because they have to survive, or they may feel that coming here is a huge adventure. They may come because they're told that the streets are paved with gold here, and they want to make a lot of money, and then they come here and they find out that there's no gold in the streets. They may come for an education. They may come because they've lived in extreme poverty, or they've been persecuted due to their religion or their politics. Their dreams about what their life is going to be like, as well as the fear that if they don't make it in the U.S., they may have to go back to their country of origin. And I mentioned what the current trends were, the Asians, Indians, South Americans, and where people tend to go. Okay, melting pot or mixed salad. I brought this up already. So we talked about being a person of privilege, but if you're in the majority group, people don't usually utter these kinds of things. You don't talk about this in polite company, but what are some of the ways that people who are in the majority can exert their power, their influence over somebody who's a newcomer? What do you think? Preferential hiring. Okay. Wouldn't happen here, of course. Okay. What else? Excuse me? What about language? Right. Right. There is the expectation that you will assimilate and speak English. Okay. What else? Who said that? You did. Could you explain that a little? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very true. What else? Did I see a hand back there? No? Well, I think the biggest thing that I hear about from people, well, if they're in the U.S., they should be speaking English. Well, sometimes people may still be speaking their language of origin because maybe they don't have access to learn how to speak English, or their way of expressing ideas is there is a manner in which expressing certain kinds of ideas is more comfortable to them in their in their language of origin, because maybe the English language doesn't have certain words or certain expressions to convey a similar meaning. So we in the majority might say, well, learn English, but maybe for somebody it's hard, or maybe there might be somebody who feels that they don't necessarily want to learn English because they want to go back to their country of origin. So that's one of the expectations that we impose on people. People want to hold on to what has defined them culturally. One of the things is their language. And the question I'll throw out here: why did your family migrate to the U.S.? I mean, we were all once sons and daughters of immigrants. Why did your family come here? Okay. Okay, why did you come? To study, for your education. Okay. The City University wasn't free then. The City University wasn't free then for you, right? No. That was the best deal in town. What else? Yes. Marriage. Okay. The potato famine. Okay. In one of the years that I mentioned, going back here, Italy, 1900 to 1909. That was, let me just look at my figures again. Yeah. 1900 to 1909, that was the decade that Italy sent 1.9 million people. Okay? That's a lot of people. The year before it was only like 500,000. And then, let's see, as it went into 2002, the numbers dropped. So during that 10-year period, from 1910 to, what was it again? 1900 to 1909, they sent 1.9 million people. Before Hurricane Sandy, did any of you ever go to Ellis Island? No? No, you did, Randy. Okay. Did you like it? Well, now it's closed because the storm destroyed it. But what was special about Ellis Island? Well, I was there, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, something like that. I took my daughter, my husband and my daughter, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most moving experiences. When you first came into the lobby, what you saw was a pile of old suitcases and shoes. And what they were portraying was the arrival of so many different people from so many different places. It was absolutely fascinating. Then as you went upstairs into the actual areas where they had the showrooms, they had the things that people brought. handmade things, the things that people brought from their countries of origin that were meaningful to them. And you went from room to room, and then you saw where people were screened for their medical illnesses because some people were turned away. You saw where they sat. It was absolutely fascinating. I will tell you that my daughter proceeded to get lost inside of the Ellis Island Museum, and I became slightly hysterical. They returned her to me, but the Ellis Island Museum was one of the most touching places that I have ever been, and in all the course of my travels, I've been to different countries, and certainly I've been to Washington and seen many of the museums down there, but you can actually go on the Ellis Island website and research who from your family came to the U.S. first. And my grandfather had told us that we were Polish. But when I went to the Ellis Island website and I looked up the year that he arrived, and you can actually get a copy of the ship manifest, it said he was from Russia. And, well, the reason for that is that Russia and Poland were squabbling over where their lines were drawn during that time, and they couldn't agree. And the gentleman over there who said that people were draft dodgers, I think that my grandfather might have been a draft dodger. He didn't want to get inducted into, this was right before the Russian Revolution, so he probably didn't want to have to go fight for the Russian army. But there's all kinds of information available on that website. Hopefully they'll open up the museum again. I don't know if they'll put it back on Ellis Island. God forbid it ever gets washed out again. But that's an interesting little piece of history. Okay. Okay, overcoming stereotypes, bias, and prejudice. The first step is awareness, to know that we have a prejudice or a stereotype, that we may say, it's bad when a sentence starts with the word all. All Asians are, whatever, fill in the blank. Or all African Americans are, fill in the blank. When you see things in terms of extremes, not a good thing. When you don't see a person as an individual, not a good thing. So we would look to strike that word all from the sentence. We want to look to determine what the source is for that stereotype. Expand your knowledge by getting to know different people, giving more than just lip service to the idea that you are a forward-thinking person and you value diversity. You have to get to know people. And you would look to search for similarities, maybe between your background and the background of the people who you work with. And here's a concept. Okay, so I've been a therapist for many, many, many years. And this little square thing that looks like a window, we call it the Johari window. And in that section where it says arena, you'll see the little things on the bottom: arena, blind spot, facade, and unknown. In that first window, those are the things that I can see about, that I know to be true about myself and that other people may see about me. So that might be how I look, what my characteristics are, what job I have here at the lab. Then I might have blind spots. There might be blind spots that I have about myself. And in that box, that would be the things that people see about me, but I don't see about myself. Like, I might see myself as being very open-minded, but Other people, when talking to me, might say, gee, you're not all that open-minded. The little box that says facade are the things that I might keep secret to myself. That maybe I have a secret hatred for some particular culture or ethnicity, somebody who maybe harmed me in the past that I never quite got over it. That would be the group, the box where I have a facade. And then the last box, that's the unknown. That's where maybe I don't even know about that particular attitude in myself, or other people might not even see it. So this Johari window, we use it in therapy when we try to get people to open up, to get to know other sides of themselves. It's not just used in terms of diversity. So the nature of the problem is learning how to change how we think. So thinking is a very complex operation. There are perceptions that we have, there's assumptions, there's beliefs, hypotheses about people, there's the conclusions that we draw, there's how we use our memories, how we solve problems. So thinking is a very, very complex thing. So unless we take the time to really examine how we think, it's a very fleeting experience, and all that we do is just register an emotion. So I think of stereotypes and biases as germs, and they're kind of lying on the surface. I mean, this all looks very clean and everything, but if a stereotype is like a germ, it looks clean, but you know, if you were to wipe it with some kind of antibacterial solution, you would pick up what the germs are lurking on the surface of this tabletop. So sometimes we tend to live on the surface of our lives. We don't examine our stereotypes and biases. And the tendency is for people to group themselves and others into social categories. And again, making those all or nothing statements. We want to try to get away from stereotype formation and prejudices. So can anybody give me an example of that kind of stereotype or prejudice? Nobody wants to venture. Lazy.
Yeah, lazy. And these are things that we may just keep to ourselves. We don't talk about them, but whenever we have to make a decision about, say, we want to do something for us, or we want to hire, or we want to work with, that stereotypical view of people.
Mm-hmm. Can somebody give me another one? That was good. I like that one. What about time? Perception of time. Or there are stereotypes that some people, some ethnic groups are always late. Okay, what else? Driving habits. Nobody? Yes, women drivers. But actually, I read about an interesting statistic. Okay, so before, and this goes probably back to the 1950s. I mean, everybody in a household now has a car. You know, the mama has a car, the daddy has a car, and each kid above the age of 16 has some form of a vehicle. Okay, so there weren't as many cars on the road back then, and I'm going back to when I grew up, there was like one car per family. But then women not just went into the workplace, but so they had to get themselves to and from work. So you had all those women that were no longer housewives, that were now in the world of work, that were driving cars. And then, because most women also, and I will also lump the men in here too, but they tend to penalize women more for this. Women, when they leave work, they have to pick up their kids from soccer. They have to pick up their kid from religious instruction. They have to take them to some kind of thing at school in the afternoon. What else? The list goes on and on. So the women are behind the wheel, and they're usually, they have a very tight schedule. So people say, oh, those women drivers, and they're in those big trucks. Why do they have to be driving those big SUVs? And, why do they need all that horsepower? Well, many times because they're hauling large numbers of kids around, not just their own kids, but somebody else's kids. But they're also in the world of work, and they're also still responsible for their kids. So we get a bad reputation for that. So we've talked about in-groups and out-groups. People tend to make attributions about the causes of group members' behavior in ways that help maintain their stereotypes. What are some of the stereotypes that one might have about people who don't work? Women who are still housewives. They have it easy. Somebody's taking care of them. They don't have to worry about these things. They're not educated. They want to live off the fat of the land. Okay. So now we move into ethnocentrism. I can't pronounce that word that easily. Is judging another culture solely by the values and standards of your own culture. It's a belief in which one's own group is the center of everything, and all others are scaled and rated with reference to it. It's further characterized as leading to pride, vanity, belief of one's own group superiority, and contempt of outsiders. That's really nasty to encounter. Somebody who's an ethnocentric is really, really difficult to listen to. They're just, you could just see the stink coming out of their minds. It's very uncomfortable. But somebody who's an ethnocentric really does believe that. Where did they get their idea about that? Have any of you seen examples of that? Yeah. What do you say to somebody who's an ethnocentric? How do you stop that? How would you try to extinguish that? If somebody was behaving like that in your office, what would you do? You would argue. Okay. So arguing back is one alternative. Anybody else have an idea how to deal with an ethnocentric? Mm-hmm. Right, so obviously this person has an unexamined life. Who was it that said that an unexamined life is not worth having or is not worth living? Aristotle. I knew you would know. Okay, so somebody who examines their life looks at their prejudices and says, wait a minute, why do, maybe that was my parents' way of looking at the world. Why do I have to be a cookie cutter of my parents? So this is a very, very bad quality to have. Talked about that. Cultural intelligence at work. Culture is pervasive. Everyone, every organization, every region and country has a culture. What is the American culture? What does it mean to become Americanized? That's a tough one. Yeah. What does it mean? Does that mean they have to eat hamburgers, once a week? Yes. Good answer, thank you. But in the colloquial sense, when we talk freely, when we are Americanized, what does it mean?
World and what our level of sophistication and knowledge of things is. So I'm not sure it's always a pretty picture of what we think of when we think of America. We tend to think that way just because there's also an aspirational quality to it. We want to be the vision of what we think we are. We want to be sort of way superior, or at least
To have pride. Right, right. Okay, so I can tell you that I am extremely proud to be born in this country and to uphold its laws and to be an American, but sometimes when I have traveled overseas and I have heard what other people say about Americans, I go, ouch, that's true. That sometimes when we are in someone else's country, we don't behave in ways that are so nice. We can see ourselves sometimes as the center of the universe. And if this permeates our attitudes, it turns people off. So sometimes we need to take things down a step or two and say, how do I appear in somebody else's culture? What are the ways that I may unknowingly be portraying my country of origin by how I act or what I say? So learning diverse cultural heritages is rewarding, inspiring, empowering. If we have an increasingly global and diverse workplace, it's really impossible to be in it without having some cultural intelligence. We want to get away from this us versus them mentality, learn to understand each other's points of view, and really embrace cultural diversity as a key to unlimited innovation and growth. And managing cultural differences at work. There are different ways that people have of communicating based on their culture, their attitudes towards conflict, their approaches to handling tasks, how they go about making decisions, how much people reveal about themselves varies by culture to culture, and how they approach knowing things. And I will also say that one of the books that I was very heavily influenced by when I was in graduate school was a book titled Ethnicity and Family Therapy. And what that book did was really open my eyes. And I went to graduate school a really, really long time ago, and I still have the book. And then I've also purchased the second edition, because each chapter of that book was written about a different ethnic group, which they describe from the view. In other words, if it's talking about, Irish families, the the editor of the book wrote the chapter on Irish families, and it was absolutely fascinating. So each chapter written by a member of that ethnic group, and they described what their approaches were to therapy and getting help, what they identify as a symptom, the family structure. It was so interesting. And if any of you are interested in reading about your family, your ethnicity, your culture of origin, just give me a holler and I can make a copy of that chapter for you. So we all have visible cultural differences, but invisible roots. If you like to think of it as being like a tree, the leaves on the tree up there are the visible cultural differences, and the roots are those things growing below the ground. So let it begin with courtesy. Gee, what happened to that? Oh, we are all human beings. We're sharing something about yourself creates an environment in which your coworkers want to share something with you. If your department has newcomers, and I always think of the poor postdocs. The postdocs come here from another country, and they don't have much money. They think when they're coming here to Brookhaven Lab, they're going to be within a stone's throw of Manhattan, and they find out that, how far away they are from everything. And, they have to get an apartment and learn the ways of the lab. It's a huge adjustment for them. And many of the postdocs, they could use a helping hand, somebody who is a little bit more empathetic, to ask them how they're adjusting to living on Long Island, help them identify where to locate places that they might socialize, medical resources, if they have kids, where they might find a pediatrician. Somebody who's been here at the lab a while can suggest activities here, different programs within BERA to help them meet new people and make friends. Families and outside interest, people might open up and say, oh, I did this on my vacation, or this is what I did on the weekend, or my spouse made this special food that's, part of our culture. And if we listen with more sensitivity and, interest in what people are saying and what they're sharing, it'll make somebody feel more welcome and more valued. And we all get similar needs from work. We all want to come to work at a place where we can use our skills and be rewarded, and we would want to include newcomers in the discussion, ask for their opinion, and strive for inclusion. And then this is my final slide. What can management do? Recognize the fine line between freedom of expression and potential sources of conflict. Respect and value people as individuals. Recognize and provide recognition for their contributions. Be sensitive to the possibility of newcomers needing a little additional help to become oriented to the lab. Be alert for any subtle forms of workplace bullying. I have heard of members of their own ethnic group bullying them because they've been here longer and they are in the majority. So the manager has the responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen, and it's your job to uphold the respectful workplace policy. And then here's information about the EAP, and everybody here at the lab gets 5 free counseling sessions per person in the family. So if you have a family of 4 and you're having a family problem, you'll have a total of 20 free counseling visits. The only caveat is you have to go to one of the providers that is in Magellan's system. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Jude, and she's going to link it up to emotional intelligence. And there you go.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi. So in contrast to Nancy's early experiences,
Wait a minute.
I grew up in a little tiny town in Wisconsin, which is, of course, in the middle of the country, and in a farm town, where, to me, diversity was Lutherans and Methodists. Like, that's the most diversity that we had. We were a very, very strong Catholic family, and there was, in this town, mainly churches, bars, and car dealerships. That's about it. And so you were either a Ford family, a General Motors family, a Catholic family, a Methodist family. But that's about, and those lines were very clearly drawn. I'm not kidding. They were very clearly drawn in this town. And I say that because, you know, one, it'll speak to the benefits of understanding emotional intelligence, but and why that is, why that even in this very parochial kind of world, there are still these clear lines where you would think everybody kind of looks the same, and that there are still these very clear lines of division and ways of thinking that people tend to feel theirs is superior to the other. And my best friend was a Lutheran who lived next door, and we would walk home from kindergarten fighting about, you know, whether it was good to have a pope, whether it was important to have a pope, whether it was going to church on Sunday was mandated, whether that was a good, I mean, we would fight about these kinds of things because that's how strongly those beliefs went for us. Now, that being said, so that's the world I grow up in, and so I never met anyone of a non-Christian religion or of another. Well, no, I do think we had some immigrants that were like farm workers that were Mexican people, but I did not know them. I saw them around, but I didn't know them. But I didn't get to know anybody that was really other than that kind of middle America world until I went to college. And then a lot of myths got exploded of things that were shorthand for they're not as good as us, that I learned about almost everybody who wasn't from the kind of world that I was raised in. And it doesn't take very long for you to kind of get that the jokes aren't funny and they're not appropriate, and this kind of thinking doesn't play in the music department of a big university where everybody is there, just like a place like this, where there's just all kinds of different kinds of people together. So that it was a wonderful early experience in tripping over on my own assumptions and the kinds of thinking that I was raised to believe. But I will say this, I read The Diary of Anne Frank, I saw Fiddler on the Roof, which is about the pogroms in Russia and how all these poor Russian Jews had to migrate to where, at the very end of the movie, they say they're leaving their village, and one villager says to the other, where are you moving to? And one guy says, Chicago, and he said, me too, we'll be neighbors. And that's what they think, you know, that's what it'll be like. But I learned about what happened to the Jews in Russia from that movie. I saw Cabaret kind of obsessively, the movie Cabaret, which is about what was happening in Germany right as the Nazis were taking over, and the anti-Semitism that fed this nightmare that became the Holocaust. I read The Diary of Anne Frank, as I said. I saw Sidney Poitier in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and saw this mixed race, this discussion, a very rich discussion about what happens when two families from very different races in this time and place come together. And these movies engaged my thinking about worlds and people that I've never seen, I hoped to see, but I didn't really know personally. And I recommend, before we get into this little more technical discussion of emotional intelligence, using movies, plays, and books To Kill a Mockingbird is another one of the best books ever written, probably, to explore a time and place, and it has one of the most important lines in terms of understanding emotional intelligence in the world in the realm of diversity, when Atticus Finch says to his daughter, if you want to understand another person, walk around in their shoes for a little while. That's further on in the book, but it's a great line about how we come to understand other people and gain some kind of empathy for their experience. But I learned about the world through books, films, and plays. And it is one of the best ways to learn about people that we may never meet or have not yet met, because it engages our emotions in a story. There's a narrative, there's a hero, and there's an emotional catharsis or some kind of an emotional connection that we make through a story that is one of the best ways to learn. And it's a way of entering a world that we have not yet experienced. So it's kind of a warm-up, to another way of thinking. And so I would recommend some of those movies, just really check into them. And if you want to understand autism and the world of people who think like autistic people may think, and they can come across as quite different than us. Temple Grandin, made by HBO. There's a wonderful movie called Something the Lord Made. You know this movie about an African-American, brilliant African-American engineer who is really only allowed to be a janitor at the time of the movie, who helps this heart surgeon develop a device for, I'm not going to say too much. Check it out. It's a great movie. You can get it on Netflix. But I wanted to say that movies and plays and things that engage your emotions are a great way to develop our emotional intelligence because it puts us in the shoes of others. Another brief thought. So after college, I fell in love with this Australian guy, and I go to Australia, which is it's basically a white majority there. And it is an English-speaking country. And even so, even though it was my language, and I fit in very easily in terms of the predominant culture there, I watched television there, and I didn't laugh at the comedies, and I didn't understand a lot of the references, and I would be in a room full of people laughing a lot at the characters on the TV shows, and I didn't get it. And I was there for 6 months, and about the 5th month, I started to get it. I didn't understand some of the terms they used, but the humor was different. It was just different, and I felt so much like an outsider. And another way, and that experience changed my thinking again, so that it helped me again to recognize when you go to another culture, it takes a while to figure stuff out. There's a shorthand that we have of jokes, of humor, of references. And if somebody's really here from another culture, we could put ourselves in their shoes and say they may be shy, they may be uncomfortable because they can't quite follow some of what's the shorthand for the rest of us that are in the majority. So those are just some thoughts to start out our adventure here in, back here. So, I wanted to go, how do I go back one? Well, okay. What am I doing wrong? Previous, right there. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. There are these 4 dimensions to what we would call emotional intelligence and diversity in the workplace, or emotional intelligence and diversity. There are these 4 dimensions. One is affirmative introspection, which has to do with understanding ourselves and recognizing our own blind spots and the things that Nancy was talking about. One is intercultural literacy, which we can gain by kind of fostering an awareness and understanding about people that are from cultures that are quite different from our own. Social architecting goes on within teams, in organizations, where we can structure the way people interact and the ways that we are working together to maximize the uses of diversity, to make that work for us, rather than that be lines of divisions. And self-governance, and that relates to the actual emotions that we feel that are not necessarily conscious nor intended, that we can learn to work with to gain more emotional intelligence overall, that then helps us in this in the world of, in this global economy where we're going to interact with people that from everywhere, and there's a richness and wonderfulness to that if we're ready for it. So emotional intelligence is extremely valuable for right here and right now in the networked world. This is our time. It's an increasingly complex world. And this is the thing, that differences in values, language, behaviors, preferences, and norms touch us at an emotional level. And they produce an emotional as well as an intellectual response. And sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes it's just a sense of, it can be just as, well, when I was in Australia, I was the outsider, so it was up to the other people to kind of help me to integrate a little bit more, explain the joke to me. And if they weren't nice people, that I was out of luck. I just, and, but they happen to be nice people, and they did, but that doesn't happen. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes people get offended because we can get offended because something gets taken out of context, or we think that we're being misinterpreted, and there's an emotional reaction to something that's other, there's something that's different, that really arises from, like Nancy pointed out, the thing below the iceberg. For my background, growing up in a world where we didn't recognize that we weren't superior, that this world was, well, I mean, in my little world, it was, that Catholics, not only, that Catholic bake sales were better than Lutheran bake sales, and our rules were more spiritual than Lutheran rules, and these were just very real things to us that caused visceral and emotional reactions when we had conversations about these things. As I got older, that seemed silly to me, those kinds of divisions. And yet, in the music department, say, the first time I was in a choir, the first time that one of my gay colleagues wanted his boyfriend to come to be part of the reception after the show, everybody had a kind of a collective gasp. But this was a long time ago, unfortunately. And he did bring his boyfriend, and everybody treated his boyfriend very respectfully. At the same time, there was an awkwardness and a kind of a clunkiness, because we were not habituated to this, and he was other, and this was just different. And that emotional kind of gut reaction may not be something that we're proud of, but if we can recognize that's some programming, that's programming that goes below the surface of our thinking, and be willing to examine it, it becomes more part of our language, it becomes more part of, we rethink that and say, what am I really reacting to here? It's just unfamiliar to me. If I have some belief that is condemning of that person, does that give me the right? That could be my personal belief. It doesn't happen to be my personal, but I mean, if a person has a belief that's condemning of that other person, doesn't give me the right to impose that on them. So I still have to have what we call emotional self-regulation, that's the self-governance, to keep that to ourselves and treat another person with respect. But the thing is, these emotional reactions do lead to behaviors. They lead to sometimes unconscious ways of treating other people. We want to make them conscious. That's the goal. And that's what emotional intelligence really is about. Now, there is an evolutionary imperative, a survival imperative to this idea that we belong to something, we belong to a team. Think about, Yankees, Mets, even worse, Yankees, Red Sox. Think about how strongly people, Packers and anybody else, how strongly people identify with their team. There's a new book out about that, actually, about the science of why people get so emotionally charged up about literally their sports team. Well, it has to do with this biological imperative, this evolutionary need to belong to something, to a group, but that's going to help us survive. That's going to help us get what we need. And that group has to be coherent, and it has to have some kind of a boundary that we're working together and we're for each other. And that is bound up in our subconscious. It's bound up in our sense of what it means to survive. And then that group becomes an extension of who we are. So if that group's doing well, we're doing well. And if that group is not doing well, we're not doing well. And this can be carried to various extremes. And it's just an important idea. It's really important to neutralize the why. This is such a strong thing in us, to have this need to kind of draw these lines between us and some other group. We can also transcend it by understanding it, that this is something that we're born with, we're better than that. We defied gravity, and we can get to, Hong Kong in 13 hours or something. We can overcome some of this biological underpinnings of us and them that is really in us. Because those same biological really built into our brain neurologically, psycho meaning how we think, it affects how we think, social, how we connect, how we attach to other people. Those factors that bind us together also blind us to what is worthy and okay, and in fact, maybe even necessary and good and important for us about others. So it's part of being human, and and that's why the little cartoon, once you change your preconceptions, the woods are full of surprises. Once we let go of some of the old, I can't embrace or even try to understand someone so different from myself, there's a lot of surprises. Like Nancy said, food, often food. So in the idea of becoming a change agent, wherever we may be, in a family, in your workplace, self-knowledge and knowing where our own biases and our assumptions, and we all have them, knowing the roots of them, trying to understand what are the social forces that shape that thinking in us, what do we accept from those sometimes very ancient roots, or sometimes just 1 or 2 generations of roots, or just that part of the country that we come from. What do we accept of that, and what just doesn't work? It doesn't fly. It doesn't fit with the actual world we're in and the life we're actually living. So awareness and acceptance of our own identity. You can be proud of who we are. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be proud of who we are as a person without making that be in some way the best and only way to be. Understanding of our worldview and the experiences, relationships, and social forces that shape that worldview. Sometimes changing your worldview, and in my case this definitely happened, changing my worldview to the extent that it has been changed creates some big divisions between myself and the world that I grew up in, and many of the people that still think the way they thought, regardless of the internet, regardless of you can Google anything and find out, regardless of movies and plays and books and all kinds of revelations about the wonders of others, of the richness of other cultures, people still think the way I was raised to think. And so my worldview has been completely upended and changed, and I don't really fit with those people anymore. And that can be a sense, that can produce in us a sense of threat. And emotional intelligence is really this concept, which we've been talking about month after month, of working with that sense of threat. How do I overcome what in the amygdala of the brain is a sense like something's wrong and I'm going to be hurt? And even being, separating from your family of origin and the beliefs that we were taught can produce a sense of threat. And we can work that through, we can rise above it, and we can find a way to not necessarily alienate those people and still embrace who it is we want to be, and maybe even educate those people, maybe even help those people move along a bit. An insight into our own biases and assumptions and others, and the ways in which our own behavior may grow from them. So the first step is this idea of self-awareness. Self-governance is getting mastery over the feelings that differences involve. And the feelings are, like I just explained about, the first time that my gay colleague brought his partner to a concert, to the reception after the concert, it was a sense in the group, it was only a group of 12 people. So I didn't have a partner, so I was just feeling lonely. But the sense of awkwardness, this sense of awkwardness is a sense of threat. I don't know how to relate to these two people as a couple back in the 1980s when this happened, right? Well, now things have changed, thankfully. It's a different world now. There's still controversy. There's still struggle. This happens with race and every other ethnicity, that our introduction to it, every time there's maybe a new level of introduction to it, produces some kind of discomfort. But it's human. It's a human reality. It's new. It's unknown. And if we are able to recognize that in ourselves and not give into it, we don't have to act on a feeling. We can be aware of it. We can look at it. We can say, I got to talk to somebody about this, or I've got to work it through, on my own. And that takes some maturity to do that. And it's a wonderful thing to do. Because working out emotional reactions is not possible sometimes through reason and logic, because your own reasoning might be the old programming. It can be a lot of things you hear that are biased and stereotypical as well. The most powerful ways to kind of reprogram ourselves is through an emotional response that is equally powerful, but in another direction. And I have to say, my bias, if I have one, is that often happens through the arts. That often happens through, or just exposing ourselves through, go to another country, be there for a while. Have an emotional, if you can't afford to go to another country, I'm saying, you can watch a movie, you can go to a restaurant where you don't understand the menu, go to places where you're going to be uncomfortable. Seriously, you'll have an emotional experience of what it's like to be part of a culture in some small way that is a challenge. And that working through those emotions and kind of getting a sense of what that feels like, one, it grows empathy for others that are in America and learning in a very fast pace what's demanded of people to be here. And it is an emotional experience which moves thinking and it's sort of a more of a coherent way of making change, is trying to engage our own emotions. And the thing is, if we deny or suppress emotions that are in some way conflicted, like an old view versus a new view, it's pretty hard to reprogram some kinds of thinking if it's highly valued, say by our family, but when we suppress it or deny it, it goes into the corners of our mind. It goes deep into that iceberg that Nancy was representing, and then it comes out as prejudice and bigotry in ways that we would not even recognize in ourselves. And it comes out in fear-based reactions, fear and judgment-based reactions that seem perfectly fair, to our conscious mind. So this is a bit of effort that if we put in, that it's worthwhile putting into in terms of our self-awareness, so that the sense of threat, I'm saying, is a human reality. It's a biological imperative. So give yourself a break and work with it. Work with it. So intercultural literacy, which is in America, maybe, especially in New York, maybe one of the best places to be able to experience people from many different cultures and to get comfortable with the way, what the values, the history of another culture, so that the more we know about it, the more we are familiar with the story of people from other cultures. We're create a kind of a shorthand, or at least know how to respect another person by putting ourselves in their shoes, or asking a lot of questions so that that person can then share themselves with us. So we call intercultural literacy the capacity to understand others' cultural rules, norms, and values, to empathize and metaphorically walk in their shoes, the ability to avoid judging others' behavior by the standards that we have from our own background, and openness to the advantages and the disadvantages of diverse cultural norms. This is a famous story about Paul Simon's Graceland album back in the 80s as well, when there was still apartheid in South Africa, if you recall, and many, many artists were boycotting Sun City and that part of South Africa because of the apartheid that was going on. And Paul Simon did a controversial thing. He reached out to Ladysmith Black Mambazo and other black artists in South Africa, and he broke the boycott, which made a lot of people upset because he didn't go through the African National Congress, and yet he brought this music to the mainstream. So it's still a controversy whether he should not or shouldn't have done that, but he showed he just did his own thing, and he didn't work with any governmental kind of rules, and yet he worked quite successfully and collaboratively with music that's very different than American music. If you've heard this album, Graceland, it's just fantastic music. I saw them on Broadway, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, and it's stunning. It's gorgeous. And it really does tell you a lot about the culture from which that music came, right? The way that it's expressed and even what they wear. But he showed himself able to work collaboratively in a creative partnership with a culture and even a governmental system that even our own governmental system wasn't in agreement with. So, he helped to open up free flow of ideas that people. The 25th anniversary is coming up of this album, and there's going to be a concert in London, and they're going to talk about the whole thing again. So you're going to really hearing about it in the news pretty soon. And then, of course, social architecting, which is creating the world within your world where the differences are celebrated, they are used, they are garnered to create more creative energy. And we can serve as a cultural interpreter by helping others understand diverse cultural norms by our own educating ourselves and changing our perspectives. Developing conflict resolution skills in ways that engage diverse worldviews and assist in mutual understanding. Honestly, that story about Paul Simon and everybody was mad at him. That's why I like the story in terms of this topic. The African National Congress was mad at him because they were trying to break apartheid and wanted all artists to boycott South African businesses and not do concerts there. And a lot of big names canceled everything and made a big statement that we're not going to engage with this racist government at all. And the American government was kind of getting on board with that, but not as strongly as they should have at that time at all. I mean, it wasn't even on the radar so much. But it was more like artists and businesses. And then Paul Simon just did his own thing. Right or wrong, he did this, and he brought this music out. So oh no, this thing is coming up. So he engaged in diverse worldviews, if you look at it that way. Like the government said we should do it this way, and artists said we should do it this way, and he said, I'm just going to bring these artists here, and I'm going to do it my way, and made something happen. And started a conversation that's been going on for 25 years and showed us this beautiful music. But we can personally work to create welcoming, inclusive environments so that diversity and the richness of it can be realized. Uh-oh, what's happening? Why is it not moving? Oh, sorry. Okay. Now, sometimes, sometimes just like listening to this today and becoming aware of maybe a time that you've experienced that sense of threat and maybe didn't feel good about it, or maybe, and you can feel very defensive sometimes when we get that sense of threat. But knowing that, recognizing that within ourselves, we can just shift our attention just a little bit and say, well, that was my human response to old programming. I didn't give into it, or if I did give into it, here's what I would do differently now. And subtle shifts of attention over time can produce a more expanded worldview. And that's really how it happens. It happens in tiny shifts, in small interactions, in expressing and, embracing our own humanity and that of others. And transformation is this long-term thing. We don't shoot for that. We shoot for subtle, real, human shifts in our experience of other people and the way we treat them. So there are some strategies for being an agent of change, just very quickly. Any ways that you can help others feel valued and respected. Include others in decisions. By having, enriching conflict resolution skills or embracing lots of different points of view, having an open mind about the opinions of others. You can negotiate alternatives if people have a very different point of view. We can reach compromises. Give feedback in a supportive and respectful manner. If you see somebody being disrespectful, bullying, truly insensitive in a way that makes someone not want to work feel that it's a hostile environment or at least uninviting, to give feedback to that person in a way that doesn't necessarily humiliate them. And we don't want to do that because that's going to raise the sense of threat, but that is honest and forthright but private. Act as a role model in every possible way by promoting diversity with inclusive thinking and actions. And work with others about ways to incorporate the richness of diversity into groups. And there's a lot of things. There's Black History Month. There's Puerto Rican Month. I think I can't think of any more because I'm up against the clock and my brain goes dead. But there's ways to celebrate all the different kinds of richness that America's come up with. There's a month for everything. Well, we could participate, we could play, and share knowledge and power, and encourage others to share with theirs, and learn to listen. Very important emotional intelligence skills, and explore ways to express the real creative value that comes through diversity. So that is my presentation.